I've now tried to record this video 3 times. So I started the year by reading the 3rd book in the Spark of the Everflame series, which is Heat of the Everflame by Penn. We're in a world of mortals where gods once upon a time colonised these lands, and they produced half mortal, half immortal offspring called the Descendants. Now these guys were supposed to look after the mortals and be like good stewards of the world, but instead they kind of just turned into snobby rulers, and they treat mortals as second-class citizens. So the Descendants look down on the mortals, and the mortals despise the Descendants. And we follow Diem, who's a young woman who's following in her mother's footsteps to become a healer. And one day, her mom disappears. And Diem has to enter the world of the Descendant royal court, but she enters a world of political rivalry, magic, secrets, and her own family secrets. I'm really enjoying this series. It's not a completed series yet. We're still waiting for book 4 to come out. If you like ACOTAR, I think you'll love this series. Because to me, it has that similar going from quest to challenge to somebody needs help to we need to find somebody to help us with this challenge, which will give us the answer to this quest. And if you like that, there's always something going on. I think you'll like this series. I have to say, this is the series that made me decide I wanted to read a fantasy series without the romance, because I thought the plot was so much better than the romance in this book. The romance it's like a enemies to lovers slow burn, but they like each other, or they know they like each other from like the first book. So that means that's not enemies to lovers. I want some loathing if it's going to be enemies to lovers. I just don't think that they dislike each other enough to class as enemies to lovers. It's definitely a slow burn in the sense that they don't get together until the 3rd book. But they're always just looking longingly at each other. And the plot was plotting so well that I was like, come on, let's get on with it. I want to know what happens in the story. So yeah, I just thought they mooned over each other a lot. I just wanted to get back to the story. But yes, thoroughly enjoyed this series so far. The ending of book 3. Then I've been listening to Mythos, Heroes and Troy by Stephen Fry, and I've been listening to them all on audiobook. I think audiobook for these books are a really good way to go, because it's as if Stephen Fry is sitting with you, helping you through all these many, many Greek names. I would say if you only wanted to pick one, go with Mythos. But I think it's a really good introduction to Greek mythology. And Stephen Fry's narration, it's vivid, it's humorous, but it's accessible. He will say there's lots of Greek names and it's not going to be possible for you to remember them all, but he will refer back and point out connections. If it's not stayed in your mind, he will help you and guide you through it. So I think the audiobook is a great way to go. Okay, what's next? So I started the Mistborn Triology, and I've read the first 2 books so far. I've got the 3rd one on hold at the library, so I need to pick that up soon. So this is set in a dystopian world where ash rains from the sky and at night a mist covers the land. And we follow Vin, who joins an ensemble group of allomancers who can harness the power of metals. They're trying to use that power to defeat the immortal Lord Ruler and free the enslaved Scar people. If you like a plot that takes its time and slowly knits itself together, I think you'll like this Mistborn series. The first book, really, it's like a heist story. And it's a lot about the planning stages of a heist. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The only thing I didn't quite, 2 things I didn't quite like. One thing happens that whenever it happens, I don't like it in a story. Personal preference. But the explanation of the magic system, it can feel quite clunky. simply because it's unfamiliar. So they're having to, Brandon Sanderson is explaining it a lot in the story. So whenever there's a fight scene, he'll be describing how someone burns tin and that enhances their size, or they burn pewter and that enhances their strength and endurance. And it's like every time a character seems to use one of these powers, it's redescribed to us. That does feel a little bit clunky, but it doesn't detract from how great these books are. So if you like a slower pace with a dramatic final third, I think that's something Brandon Sanderson's quite known for, is a slower build-up and then a hectic ending. Don't be put off by how thick they are as well, because they're quite simply written. I think fantasy, sometimes it seems very daunting because you're going to get thrown into a world that you don't understand. These books were really easy to read and understand, I think. Lady of Shadows. This was a big disappointment for me. I was eagerly waiting to read this. I loved the first book, and this book was a letdown. So in the first book, we meet Scarlet, and she is part of a dark underground syndicate in the Mortal Lands. She is a deadly assassin trained from when she was a child, and her with her sisters in crime make up the Wraiths that are feared throughout all the Mortal Lands and the Immortal Lands. So she's a badass, okay? She is ruthless. And throughout the first book, we finally find out about her tragic past, which I think is genuinely tragic. It's this big secret that she doesn't want to reveal. And I think sometimes in books, when somebody has a secret that they won't share, it's always a bit of a letdown when it finally comes out. But this was genuinely something that I thought, yeah, I wouldn't have said that either. But the second book, it's basically 70% of it is about her being so broken by the events of the first book. And I can understand you wanting to describe rock bottom for this character and how traumatic and distraught she has been from these betrayals and this loss. I can understand that, but 70% of the book, she just seemed like such a different character from the first book. And Soren, the main male character as well, he was just too fussy. Somebody fussed over me that much, I'd be like, clear off. Leave me alone. So no, it was just too far removed. And I think the fact that we'd literally changed locations, we had left all the side characters behind, and we now had a whole bunch of new side characters, it just felt like a different story to a different series. No, I just loved that first book so much. If anybody has read further on into this series, is it worth me continuing? Please let me know. So I started the Throne of Glass series as well, and I've read book 1 and book 2. And this is another book that I've ordered to put on hold at the library. I enjoy Sarah J. Maas's writing. I liked ACOTAR, A Court of Thorn and Roses. And I think you're either into it or not. Do you know that feeling? Like heyday Lost on TV, Lost episodes, where you'd get to the end of an episode and there was a what moment. I feel like her books have that, and it just like makes you want to continue reading the next chapter and the next chapter. So again, I'm enjoying this series so far. Again, we're set in the mortal realms, and all magic has vanished in these lands. And we follow yet another assassin, Selena. We follow Selena, who has been trained as an assassin since a child. One day she was betrayed and captured and enslaved in a mining camp. One day she gets the chance to become the king's champion, which I think is just the same as the king's assassin, but with daytime hours. All she has to do is fight in this tournament of other assassin type characters. So if she wins the tournament, after several years' service, she will eventually receive her freedom again. But during this tournament, strange things start to happen. People start to die. Magic, old magic, starts to reveal itself to her. Book 1 and 2, I was engaged. I like the characters. I like the love triangle that's developing. But I've heard from a lot of people that this is her best series, and that it really kicks off from book 3. So I'm excited, because I think when you finally find a series that you're excited about, and you get that, oh, I need the next book feeling. I love that. So yes, it's very easy to read. It definitely does feel quite YA, but I think she wrote this quite young. So I'm hoping as the series progresses, it gets a bit more teeth. The next thing that I chose to read was something for a bit more of a change of pace. I read Death at the Old Curiosity Shop by Debbie Young. This was just a lovely, pleasant book, I think. It was like an afternoon viewing of Midsummer Murder or Rosemary and Thyme. All the brutal clipped out of it, and you're just left with a jolly good murder. We follow Alice, who is a 50-year-old lady who has recently found herself unexpectedly divorced and made redundant. And so with her divorce settlement, she buys a old curiosity shop that is actually a cottage, and she wants to just live in it as a cottage. But she doesn't realise that the deeds state that the shop has to remain open in some form. So we see Alice as she's going through a completely different era of her life, doing something that she's not familiar with, but her slowly starting to enjoy her new freedoms and her new lifestyle. And of course, murder happens. I enjoyed it. It was a good, fun book, I think. I'm enjoying the cast of village weirdos. And in that sense, it's very Midsummer Murders. The only thing I didn't particularly like is I felt the ending was rushed and the mystery was racing to sew itself up. I think it could just have done with being a little bit longer and just took its time to explain it a little bit more. But I would read a follow-up, and in fact, I think there's something about a chess club, I think. If it follows this cast of characters again, I would read this as a follow-up to this, definitely. Easy reading, nice, gentle, nothing too tragic. Okay, so my friend sent me this book, and she sent it saying, "This is a book I loved. I think you'll like it too." Which I think is a lovely idea, sending on your books for somebody else to enjoy through the post, because my close friends don't live close to me anymore. This is quite a short novel, and it's beautifully written and understatedly written, I think. We follow Alice, who is a young woman who lives in Ireland, and she very reluctantly emigrates to America, to Brooklyn. And she mainly moves because she doesn't know how to tell her family that she doesn't want to. I think some people might find this book quite boring and that there's not much that happens in it. I think it's quite muted in its tone, cleverly to represent Alice as a character. She comes across as someone who's very passive in life, and life is happening to her rather than her actually making choices. Most of our coming of age stories are formless because they're the stories of how we are formed. And I think this book shows that beautifully. It was a short read, easy, beautifully setting, frustrating in parts. Frustrating for a reader, I think, because there were certain avenues that the plot looked like it was about to be taking. We meet a professor who's a survivor of the Holocaust. Alice starts to have interactions with racial tensions and changes within Brooklyn in the 1950s. And these stories are never further explored. And as a reader, that's frustrating because I want to know more. I think this is a clever reflection of Alice as a character. She's getting to a place where she's mature enough to observe that there are differences around her, but she isn't yet mature enough to dive deeper or interact with them more. So I think the restraint of the novel shows the restraint of Alice's growth at that time. I think there is a prequel to this book now, where we see Alice 25 years in the future. So I'm fascinated to see if Alice is different as a character, if the tone of the book is different to reflect Alice now as a different person or as a more mature person. I'm interested. I read Daughter of No Worlds, and Child of the Forgotten Gods. Who's it by? Carissa Broadbent. These books kept being recommended to me by Kindle Unlimited, and I dismissed them purely because of the covers. I just think the covers are so tacky. But I finally realised that this is the same author as The Serpent and the Wings of the Night, which I loved those books. So I thought I'd give this a go. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I obviously haven't finished the series yet, but at the same time, I don't really have any compelling to finish it. So that probably says something, to be honest. We're in a world again where some people have magic, some people don't. And we're following Susanna, who has a touch of magic. And she's a slave who, over the years, has managed to scrimp together some coins to try and be able to buy her freedom. And that does not go to plan. She barely escapes with her life, and she flees to where the magic wielders live, an establishment called the Order. And they take her on to train her. The only one available to train her is someone who is grumpy and reclusive. And you can see where this is going to go. The positives, I really liked that the main male character was different. He wasn't your usual, I am big strong warrior, I defeat dragons. He has a tragic story. He's had horrible trauma that's happened to him, and he carries that with him. He's left society to go live in his little cottage and garden. And I can relate to that feeling. But you know, he is worried, he has anxiety, and his choices and behaviour come directly from that. I just thought that was so refreshing for the male lead to not be this nothing bothers me, I can deal with anything hero. At a later point in the story, you start reading from the perspective of a flashback in time to the backstory. And I just found the backstory more compelling than the main story. So then when it switched back to the main story, I just wasn't as engaged. So yeah, it was okay. At some point I'll finish it because there are characters, particularly one character, when you find out what happens, I read last year The Maid by Freida McFadden, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. I struggled to finish that one. But I didn't want to write off the author just after one book, so I chose Never Lie as a second bite of the cherry. So we follow two newlyweds who have decided to go to a house viewing, and as they are looking around this creepy remote house, a sudden snowstorm strikes. So while they're stranded in this house, they suddenly realise that this is the home of an eminent psychologist who went missing a few years ago, and her body is never found. Trisha, one of the newlyweds, she discovers a secret stash of tape recordings, and these are all the psychologist's recordings of her sessions with her clients. So she starts to wonder if any of these will have any information or clues to what happened to her. Is she alive? Is she dead? Ooh. So I thought this was a really interesting premise, and I was excited to read this. It was okay. I'm not going to say it's a bad book. It just was. I was definitely interested in the plot. I was wanting to turn the page, whereas with the Maid, I was like, no. I really enjoyed flicking between Trisha in the current timeline, looking around the psychologist's house, and we flick back to the point of view of the psychologist in her final days, weeks and days. So I really enjoyed that, flicking between the two timelines and the two perspectives. I thought that was nicely done. But I just felt like it would have been so much better if it had a bit more rich description to it. I mean, we're stuck in this creepy house in the middle of a snowstorm, and there's just such little atmosphere created. I also think this type of book, and I can't really say what type it is without giving it away, but once you've experienced it for the first time, I don't think you can recreate that feeling. It was okay. I read Piranesi, if that's how you say it. I read Piranesi by Susan Clark. I thought this book was so odd, so peculiar. You're left thinking as you're reading it, is this important? Does this mean something? Does this mean nothing? This story follows Piranesi, who lives in the labyrinth filled with hallways and vestibules, and they are lined with statues, like marble classical statues. And he calls this place the house. He knows no way out of the house, neither does it really seem like he wants to leave the house. So this novel is written in a journal format. So Piranesi is retelling his interactions with the house and his interactions with the only other living occupant of the house, which is someone he calls the other. I just thought this book was so imaginative and intriguing. There's a thriller element to it. There's a mystery that is being unfolded through the pages, but it's not in this heart-pounding, thumping, plot-twisting kind of storytelling. It's the eeriness that creates the tension. Us discovering and Piranesi discovering at the same time through his own journals. Don't be put off, if you want to read this book, don't be put off by its dating format of the journals and how the locations within the house are described, because it can be quite confusing. You know, a date might be described as the 3rd day in the 6th month of the year of the albatross, or a location might be described as next to the statue of the lady with the beehive in the 4th vestibule in the 118th hallway. So it's not hugely important to the plot, the locations as such, and any that are mentioned enough for you to become familiar with them. It just allows the reader to experience that loss of bearings with time and space being twisted by the house. And it feels like you're constrained in the labyrinth with Piranesi. I just think that's a fascinating way to write it. I would definitely give that one 5 stars. So yes, that's everything I've read so far. I'm currently reading The Song of Achilles, which I've heard lots of great things about. And I picked up from the library A Spell of Winter by Helen Dunmore. And I thought with the hopefully the last few weeks of winter would have a last wintry book. In the years just before the First World War, Cathy and her brother Rob find themselves living alone in a decaying English mansion with their distant, stern grandfather. Abandoned by their mother while their distraught father is confined to an asylum, they roam the grounds freely with little understanding of trespass. Lost in their own private world, they seek and find new lines to cross, but they are not so separate from the outside, nor as alone as they believe. So, it says electrifying and original. Ooh. I just thought I would give that a go. I like good first lines, good first sentences in books. I saw an armful off a man once, said Kate. So let me know what you're reading, any recommendations. Like I said, I'm trying to read a whole lot of different genres this year. Anything other than horror, because I don't want to be terrified.
Mummy.
What temperature did you put it on?
12.
Good job. So I'll see you for my next video.